Welcoming you live to Research Stadium following Oregon State's 22-20 loss to the Washington Huskies. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, coming to you with Keenan Puncocher, writer for BeaversEdge.com. We're coming to you guys amidst the rain here at Research Stadium. We're staying dry for this video, so we'll definitely be a little quick breaking down this game. But Keenan, everything we thought with this game leading in, all the atmosphere, all the intensity, it really did feel like a monumental game here at Research Stadium. A wet afternoon. Oregon State just doesn't quite have enough. They fall 22-20. What are your first thoughts on this game?
Well, like you mentioned at the top of the video, the rain. You know, I think we heard quarterback DJ talk about it maybe not being as much of a factor in the press conference. Jonathan Smith did say it was much more of a factor, and I tend to agree. I think overall we tended to see teams didn't necessarily shy away from the pass game. You know, I think especially Washington, they passed, you know, a fair amount like they usually do, maybe a little bit less, but you did definitely see balls, you know, bouncing off of receivers' hands. Right. The turnovers that happened in this game, whether they were weather caused or not, maybe. But I think, you know, weather was definitely a factor. And of course, you know, as we will break it down in a little bit, the safety, ultimately, you know, that could have been caused by the weather. So I think the weather was a bit of a factor. You know, we'll talk about maybe the passing game didn't get quite as involved as we were hoping. And overall, you know, it was a very competitive, very close game. You look at the stats, very close in a lot of ways. But Beavers just ultimately fall short.
Does it surprise you that Oregon State actually ended up outgaining Washington in this matchup, Keenan?
A little bit, yeah. Yeah, you know, and I think especially because it wasn't like we were playing from 3 scores down. Right. You know, we're trying to just rack up passing yards to get back into the game. It was just a good balance for the most part on the ground and in the air. So, yeah, that does surprise me, especially just knowing how great Washington is offensively, how many points they put up against other opponents like USC. So, yeah, I am a little surprised by that.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about it, and, you know, we'll get into the defense just a minute. Because you look at the score and you go, defense allows 22 points to Washington, you feel pretty confident about your chances to come away with a victory. But again, Oregon State's offense not as efficient against this Washington defense, which Keenan and I had talked about. We thought that Washington defense was vulnerable, and I still think they could have been. You know, going back to what you said about Coach Smith, I think more than anything, Oregon State wasn't really able to get their passing attack going in that first half. It kind of got a little bit better in the second half, but, you know, starting with the offense, I mean, you know, you look at a guy like Jack Velling, right? 1 catch, 1 yard. Yep. And Jack Velling had been so huge for this team. And then, you know, you go down to the plays that I think determined this game. You mentioned the safety. Good news for Oregon State there was even after that safety, they didn't allow Washington to get points after that. It was a 9-7 ball game, and ultimately, you know, Oregon State was able to stop Washington that next drive. Keenan, the play for me that changed this whole game and really gave Washington the cushion they needed was Anthony Gould on the far side of the field from where we were, getting the ball punched out after the direct series after Katana Ladapo makes an incredible play, stopping Dylan Johnson at, you know, what, the 5-yard line? Yep, something like that. Just comes in, karate chops that ball out. Beavers get a huge break and a turnover, and then you're like, hey, you know, here they are. Gould fumbled. That was huge. I mean, you know, you can't not have the ball in your playmaker's hands, but that's just a play that, you know, unfortunately cost Oregon State in this one.
It did, yeah. You know, and going into this game, I preached about how the turnover battle, you know, the team that could win that, as often they do, you know, will win the game. Oregon State ends up with 3 turnovers, but they only allow 7 to Washington off of that. And so you kind of think about that, and they weren't necessarily killer, but you look at more big picture momentum-wise, and like you said, that Gould fumble, I think it just really, especially just from a crowd perspective, you know, right. I think, you know, after they just saw Washington look like they were going to score, we got the ball back after they fumbled, and then to just turn around and fumble like that, it's deflating. And so, yeah, I think that was a significant turning point of this game.
And then talking a little bit, Keenan, let's go to the second half. Obviously, Oregon State down to the Huskies at the halftime break, 22-10. We're sitting there talking around halftime like, you know, the game's still in hand, but definitely, you know, a weird kind of vibe. This whole game had a really weird vibe to it, and I think that really does talk about the weather, which is still coming down here behind us. It was a wet game all the way until really the fourth quarter. It kind of broke a little bit, but for the most part, Keenan, I mean, you talk about that second half. Defense allows 0 points. Washington does not score again in the second half, and I think that's where you have to look back at your offense and go, while it may be easy at home to look at the score and go, hey, Oregon State lost by 2, the safety's the difference. easy to say. I don't see it that way, Keenan. I look at the offense in the second half. Obviously they're able to get 10 points on the board, but, you look at that drive that ultimately they had to settle for the 3. When you and I were talking, like, do they take 3 here? It was a 4th and 10. They kind of had to go kick the field goal there. And then you talk about that last long drive in the third quarter where they took 10 minutes scoring. It really felt like that was like the, hey, Oregon State's playing Oregon State football. There were some incredible plays made on that drive to keep that drive alive. And then, you go to that final drive where Oregon State, right here behind us, started at their own 5, the end zone right here behind us. And they, at the end of the day, Keenan, strip everything else away. Oregon State had 1 drive to win the ball game. And if you had told them that before the game, you have 1 drive to finish the game, to win the ball game, they would have taken that. The offense looked like it was moving real good to about midfield, and then it just didn't quite work. And even DJ, said in the post game, the throw, he's got to make a better throw to Jack Velling there on 4th down with the game on the line.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I just kind of thought of it too. In the press box, I was talking to a couple folks about how Gould there at the end of the game. Do you let that ball go into the end zone? Do you give yourself that extra chance? Now you're having to go 95 yards. Plenty of time, of course. Plenty of timeouts. I kind of, messaged you. I was like, oh, here we go. We could maybe just run the clock all the way down. Even if you get a game-winning field goal, that's all you needed. But, yeah, it was just a killer. And I think, like you said, though, the defense allows 0 points in the second half. Which is actually
against this team.
I was just going to say, it's almost kind of hard to fathom.
Whether or not, Keenan, stop with this, folks. Only Arizona State, in the weirdest game ever this year, held Washington to fewer points. Again, weather, big part of that factor. But regardless, if, Beavers fans woke up this morning and said, hey, you allowed 22 points to Washington, you would have liked your odds.
You would have definitely liked your odds, absolutely. Yeah. We talked briefly a little bit about turnovers too. DJ, of course, had the 2 interceptions. As I mentioned, Huskies only get 7 points off turnovers, so it wasn't killer
it was the
per
Gould,
se.
It was the Gould.
Right,
yeah.
right. So his interceptions weren't killer per se. They didn't kill the Beavers' chances, but it's just, and then another stat I think about is how the Beavers, I think they were 3 of 12 on 3rd down.
Yeah.
And I think that might be one of the things that just stands out the most on the paper, because it's just, you can't do that. And then I noticed too, when we were in the presser, I think the Beavers were 2 of 5 on 4th down, and the Huskies didn't have to go for it on 4th down once. And so I think when you kind of look at that, it kind of points to, okay, some of it's gutsy calls, some of them were great decisions, you know, but ultimately when you don't convert 3 of those 4th down attempts, it's going to hurt you.
Absolutely. And the last thing I want to make note of, just because I thought it was unique in this game, Keenan, what were your thoughts on Aiden Childs getting the drive that he got in the situation he got, the first drive following Oregon State, stopping Washington after that safety?
Yeah.
Just from, again, lots to like about that freshman. He's going to be the future of this program, no doubt. I mean, even DJ got asked about it in the postgame. He didn't answer, nor like we expected him to, but he got asked about his future, and I think that's a fair point. To me, in this game, Keenan, at that moment, it did not seem like you were setting him up in a position of success. Not saying he shouldn't have played in this game, but if there was a game where maybe he didn't get in, this one
a little bit.
This one strikes me as the one that should have perhaps been.
Yeah, no, I agree, especially because I can't quite remember where they started, but he was deep in their opponent territory, and I believe his night ultimately ended on a sack that did not go so great. I think he was 1 of 2 on the night, so not a great showing, but at the same time, I think you're right. Like, one of the biggest games arguably ever in Reeser, certainly in recent memory to come here. That's a lot to, even on one drive, to ask a freshman to do when you're trying to go and defeat an undefeated Husky team. So yeah, I think especially with DJ's play maybe not being the best either, it wasn't the best night for either quarterback.
Right, throwing, and we'd be remiss, Keenan, if we didn't mention DJ's rushing. I mean, obviously Damian Martinez goes for 131, and he ran so hard tonight. I guarantee you that kid's going to be
makes
sore.
It look easy.
He's going to be sore in the morning. He took some big hits. But, Keenan, let's talk about DJ and the Beavers kind of uncorking the Dabo Sweeney playbook a little bit by letting DJ run the ball, and maybe it was more have to than want to. But regardless, DJ, in this game, Keenan goes six rushes, 53 yards, averages 8.8 a carry. You're going to like those numbers. And there was, I think, back to this run on that 13-play 16-play drive, excuse me, that went 10 minutes. The run that he had where he was just able to drag, like, he looked like Superman out there. And, you know, that's where it really felt like things were trending Oregon State's way. But at the end of the day, Keenan, they just couldn't make enough plays, couldn't put enough points on the board to complement what was, you know, arguably a pretty good defensive game plan. That's 2 straight years Trent Bray's put together a darn good defensive game plan to stop Michael Penix.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, and weather was maybe a part of it. I think Penix had 28 pass attempts on the night, so, you know, it's not like they needed to throw 50 times, but when he did, it wasn't always the most comfortable passes. I don't think necessarily the defense got enough pressure on him.
Right.
You know, I don't think we recorded a sack on the night, and so when that happens, you know, from what I saw, Penix was, you know, at times out of the pocket, a little bit flustered, but for especially the passes that he was able to complete to Odunze, those were the ones that he was open, he was able to sling it downfield, and despite the rain, I kept saying upstairs in the press box how, you know, both teams really were taking shots down the field trying to make a big play.
You would have been surprised if I told you Jalen Polk didn't have a catch.
Yeah.
Going into this game, if you had said that, you would held, you know, O'Dunes only had 106 yards. I mean, for him, that's a slow night. I mean, I guess he had the 2 touchdowns, obviously, and made some plays. I mean, you think about the play to clinch it right here behind us. You know, Oregon State still had a glimmer of hope until Washington converted that 3rd down. And again, risky play, but again, a play that Michael Penix made, and he made a couple big plays tonight through the air. And again, he only has 162 passing yards, you know, to DJ's 166, but it felt like Penix's were just a little bit more at the right time, at the right moment, and he made some plays where you're just like, wow. So, and you know, that's who he is as a quarterback. So, ultimately, Oregon State falls to Washington, 22-20 here at Reser Stadium. The Beavers fall to 8-3 on the season, 5-3 in Pac-12 play. Keenan, they've got the Ducks this next weekend, or should I say Friday, Black Friday at Autzen Stadium in the afternoon. You and I will be there live from Autzen Stadium, so excited to bring you guys coverage live next week. How does Oregon State flush this? I mean, we heard Katano Ladapo talk about not letting 1 loss become 2, and you know, you love the confidence saying, hey, I got 2 more games left, I'm not losing another one. Oregon State coming into that game off of just a brutally emotional loss. Meanwhile, Oregon didn't really have to show up to win this weekend. So just give me your initial thoughts on that game, and then obviously we'll be there, folks, so make sure to stay tuned.
Yeah, you know, I think as tough as it is, and especially with it being so close in this game, you truly, like they say, you have 24 hours to maybe stew on it, think it over, and then you just have to flush it. Because we're talking about going into Autzen Stadium, we know how good the Ducks are and how good they've been this year. And really, we know it's probably the last Civil War matchup ever.
Yeah,
and so,
at least for the foreseeable future at the very least.
And so if you're a Beaver football player and that doesn't get you motivated, even after this loss, I mean, nothing will.
Right.
And so you just have to be able to flush it, let Washington do their thing, okay, move on, and then you just got to focus on beating the Ducks.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, it happened here last year, and it's very difficult in Autzen, but I think if you're that team, especially if you're DJ, maybe you are a little uncertain of your future, I think going out on a win against the Ducks would be pretty amazing.
Just obviously 1 win for Oregon State at Autzen Stadium since 1994, Keenan, 2007. So that's 1 in your and I's lifetime for those who are keeping track of Keenan and I's ages. But ultimately, big picture, Keenan, Oregon State now finds himself out of the Pac-12 playoff race, or Pac-12 championship race, I should say. And, you know, they obviously held their own destiny coming into tonight. It would have been really interesting if they had got that win, but now falling to 8-3, 5-3. Arizona jumps them in the conference standings now after the Wildcats knocked off Utah. Big win for them. So in essence, you know, we were kind of talking about it in the post-game press conference. It's going to be interesting to see now what Oregon State does next week, Keenan, and ultimately what bowl game they go to. As you know, we saw an Alamo Bowl rep here today. I'm thinking that at this point Oregon State's probably a likely shoo-in for the Holiday Bowl, but it's going to be interesting to see how that all shakes out. And that's the important thing. They still have a big time bowl game and not an LA Bowl,
right.
a medium solid Pac-12 bowl, and that's still the opportunity still exists to get 10 wins this season, Keenan.
It does, absolutely. And it may be disappointed tonight, certainly disappointed maybe with some of the other losses earlier in the season. This could have been a totally different season.
True.
But again, just kind of like the players and coaches were saying in that press conference, you have to still hold your head high and only control what you can control moving forward now.
Absolutely. And again, Oregon State falls to Washington 22-20 here at Resource Stadium. They're back in action at Autzen Stadium against the Ducks next Friday. Keenan Puncocher and I will be there bringing you guys live coverage at BeaversEdge.com, so make sure to stay tuned. Again, Oregon State falls to Washington 22-20 at Resource Stadium. For Keenan Puncocher, I'm Brenden Slaughter, signing off.